The storm had not yet arrived, but the sky already knew. Dark clouds gathered slowly, like a warning whispered across the heavens. In a quiet village where life moved gently and predictably, there lived a man named Eli. He was not known for strength, nor for wisdom, nor for wealth. If anything, he was known for something people often misunderstood. He trusted too easily. Every morning, Eli would walk to the edge of the village, stand on a small hill and pray. Not long prayers, not loud ones, just simple words, spoken with certainty. God, I trust you today. The villagers would pass by and shake their heads. Trust doesn't feed you, one would say. Trust doesn't fix problems, another would laugh. Trust won't save you when trouble comes. Eli never argued. He simply smiled and continued. One year the rains did not come. The river began to shrink. Crops failed. Fear spread faster than the dry wind across the land. People who once felt secure now held tightly to whatever they could control. But Eli still went to the hill. God, I trust you today. Weeks passed. Hunger grew. The villagers began storing food, guarding resources, turning inward. Survival became their god. One evening, a group approached Eli. You keep saying you trust God, they said. Then why aren't you afraid? Eli looked at them, not with superiority, but with peace. I am not unafraid because I have food, he said softly. I am unafraid because I know who holds tomorrow. They laughed, but not as loudly this time. Days later, the drought worsened. The last well in the village began to dry. Panic erupted. People fought over water. Friendships broke. Fear ruled. But every morning, Eli climbed the hill. God, I trust you today. One night, exhausted and weak, Eli collapsed in his small home. For the first time, doubt whispered loudly. What if nothing changes? What if this trust is meaningless? What if you are alone? Eli closed his eyes. And for a moment, silence. Then, not a voice from the sky, not thunder, not a miracle, but a quiet conviction settled in his heart. Faith is not proven when it works. Faith is proven when it waits. The next morning, Eli rose again. And once again, he walked to the hill. But this time, something was different. Not in the sky, not in the land, but in him. His steps were slower, but stronger. His voice quieter, but deeper. God, I still trust you today. And that day, something unseen began to move. Because faith that pleases God is not loud, it is loyal. It is not built on results. It is built on relationship. It does not demand, it depends. The scriptures say in Hebrews 11:6, without faith it is impossible to please God. Not difficult, not rare, impossible. Why? Because faith is the language of relationship with God. Anyone can follow instructions. Anyone can perform rituals. Anyone can speak words. But faith reveals the heart. When Abraham was asked to leave everything familiar, he did not receive a map. He received a promise. And he walked, not because he understood, but because he trusted the one who spoke. When Moses stood before the sea, he did not part it with confidence in himself. He acted in obedience, trusting that God would make a way where none existed. And when Jesus Christ called fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary people, he did not ask for perfection. He asked for faith. Faith that leaves nets behind. Faith that walks uncertain roads. Faith that follows without guarantees. Back in the village, Eli's story continued. On the 7th week of drought, something happened. A traveler arrived, weak, thirsty, barely able to stand. The villagers hesitated. They had little left. But Eli brought him into his home. He gave him water, the last of what he had. "Why would you do this?" the traveler asked. Eli smiled. "Because I trust God." The traveler drank, rested, and before leaving, he said something strange. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "look to the sky." The next morning, Eli climbed the hill once more. "God, I trust you today." And then a wind began to rise. Not violent, not sudden, but steady. Clouds gathered, darker than before. The air shifted. The scent of rain filled the atmosphere. And then rain fell. Not a drizzle, not a passing shower, but a downpour that soaked the land, filled the wells, revived the crops, and restored hope. The village rejoiced. But Eli simply closed his eyes and whispered, "I knew you would not forget." Because faith that pleases God does not celebrate only the miracle. It rests in the character of God. But here is the deeper truth. Faith is not always rewarded with rain. Sometimes faith walks through fire. Sometimes faith stands in silence. Sometimes faith holds on when everything seems lost. 3 men once stood before a king, refusing to bow to an idol. They were threatened with fire, real fire, consuming fire. And they said something extraordinary. "Even if God does not deliver us, we will not bow." That is faith that pleases God. Not faith that says, "God will save me," but faith that says, "Even if he doesn't, I am still his." This kind of faith cannot be shaken by outcomes. It is anchored in identity. It is not based on what God does. It is based on who God is. And this is where many struggle, because we often treat faith like a transaction. I believe, so God must respond. I trust, so God must provide. I pray, so God must answer. But faith is not a contract. It is a connection. When Peter the apostle stepped onto the water, he did something impossible. But the moment he shifted his focus from Jesus to the storm, fear replaced faith, and he began to sink. Yet even then, Jesus reached out. Why? Because faith is not about never falling. It is about who you reach for when you do. Back in our world today, storms still come. Not always with rain and wind, but with uncertainty, loss, anxiety, and waiting. People pray, but answers delay. People hope, but outcomes differ. And in those moments, faith is tested. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly. In the decisions no one sees. In the prayers whispered at night. In the choice to trust. Again. Faith that pleases God wakes up each day and says, "I don't understand everything, but I trust you anyway." It walks forward when the path is unclear. It gives when resources are low. It loves when it's easier to withdraw. It forgives when pain says, "Hold on." It believes not because everything makes sense, but because God is faithful. And slowly over time, something beautiful happens. Faith grows. Not instantly, not magically, but deeply. Like roots beneath the soil, invisible but unshakable. And one day when the storm comes, and it will come, this faith stands. Not because the storm is weak, but because the foundation is strong. So what kind of faith pleases God? Not perfect faith, not loud faith, not impressive faith, but consistent faith. Faith that shows up daily. Faith that trusts quietly. Faith that endures faithfully. Faith that says, "God, even here, even now, even when I don't see it, I trust you." and in that simple, unwavering trust, he is pleased. The rain had fallen, the had softened, and the village slowly returned to life. But something had changed in the hearts of those who had witnessed Eli's unwavering trust. The miracle was not just in the water that filled the wells. It was in the quiet question now echoing through every mind. What does it mean to truly trust God when life is not a drought, but a daily uncertainty? Days passed, and the story of Eli spread beyond the village. Some came to see him, not because he was powerful, but because he was peaceful. And peace in a restless world is the rarest kind of strength. One afternoon, a young woman named Mara arrived. Her eyes carried a heaviness that words could not fully explain. She had not come out of curiosity. She had come out of desperation. I used to believe, she said, sitting across from Eli beneath a tree. I prayed, I trusted, but nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. Eli listened, not interrupting, not correcting, just listening. So tell me, she continued, her voice trembling, what is the point of faith if it doesn't fix anything? Eli looked at her gently and asked, what were you expecting faith to do? Mara hesitated. Make things better. Make life easier. Give me answers. Eli nodded slowly. Faith doesn't always change your situation, he said, but it always changes you. Mara frowned. That doesn't help if my situation stays broken. Eli picked up a small seed from the ground and placed it in her hand. This seed, he said, when buried, looks like it has been lost, hidden, forgotten. But beneath the soil, something is happening you cannot see. He paused. Faith is trusting that God is working, even when your life feels buried. Mara looked down at the seed, silent. Some of the greatest works of God, Eli continued, begin in silence. Her voice softened. But how long do I have to wait? Eli smiled faintly. That is the question faith learns not to fear. Because faith that pleases God is not measured by how quickly answers come, but by how deeply trust remains. That evening, Mara stayed in the village. And for the first time in a long time, she prayed. Not for answers, not for change, but simply, God, help me trust you again. And that prayer, small, fragile, barely formed, was more powerful than she realized. Because heaven does not ignore weak faith. It responds to honest faith. Not far from there, in another place, another story was unfolding. A man named Daniel stood in a place where faith was not just difficult, it was dangerous. Surrounded by laws that opposed his beliefs, pressured to compromise, threatened with consequences, Daniel chose something that made no sense to the world. He remained faithful, even when it meant risk, even when it meant loss, even when it meant standing alone. When Daniel continued to pray despite the decree, he wasn't trying to prove something. He was simply refusing to disconnect from the God he trusted. And when he was thrown into the den of lions, something remarkable happened. God did not stop him from entering the den, but God met him inside it. This is a truth many struggle to accept. Faith that pleases God does not always prevent the trial, but it ensures you are never alone in it. Back in the village, Mara began to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. She started waking up early, walking with Eli to the hill. At first she said nothing. Then one morning quietly she whispered, God, I trust you today. The words felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. But she said them again the next day, and the next. And slowly those words began to sink deeper than her fears. Because faith grows through repetition of trust. Not one grand moment, but many small choices. Meanwhile, the villagers who once mocked Eli now watched him differently. They had seen what faith looked like in a storm, but now they were learning what it looked like in ordinary days. And sometimes ordinary days are the greatest test of all, because it is easy to cry out to God in crisis, but it takes real faith to walk with Him in routine, to trust Him when nothing is wrong and nothing is spectacular, to believe when life is not falling apart, but also not falling into place. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mara turned to Eli and asked, "Will there always be storms?" Eli looked at the sky, then back at her. "Yes," he said gently, "but storms are not sent to destroy your faith. They reveal it." Mara thought for a moment. "And what if my faith is still small?" Eli smiled. "Then it is still enough. Because faith that pleases God is not about size, it is about sincerity. Jesus Christ once said that even faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. Not because the seed is strong, but because the God it trusts is. And this is where everything changes. Faith is not powerful because of you. Faith is powerful because of who you place it in. Days turned into weeks. Mara's situation had not completely changed. Some problems remained. Some prayers were still unanswered. But something within her was different. She was no longer defined by fear. She was no longer controlled by uncertainty. She had found something greater than solutions. She had found trust, and that trust began to shape her life. She forgave someone she once resented. She gave when it felt inconvenient. She chose peace when anxiety knocked, not because life was perfect, but because her faith was growing. And this is the hidden beauty of faith that pleases God. It transforms you before it transforms your circumstances. One morning, as she stood on the hill alone, Eli nowhere in sight, Mara lifted her eyes and said, "God, I trust you today." No hesitation, no fear, no doubt drowning her voice, just quiet confidence. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Faith had become part of her, not something she tried to have, but something she lived with. And that is the goal of faith, not occasional belief, but constant trust. Because in the end, faith that pleases God is not about one moment of courage. It is about a lifetime of surrender, a lifetime of choosing trust over fear, a lifetime of saying, "I don't need to see everything," to believe in the one who sees it all. And as the wind gently moved across the hill, as the sky stretched endlessly above, as life continued with all its uncertainties, faith remained steady, quiet, unshaken, and God was pleased. The hill became quieter over time, not because people stopped coming, but because something sacred had settled there. It was no longer just a place of prayer. It had become a place of surrender. Mara stood there often now, sometimes alone, sometimes with others who had heard whispers of a different kind of life. A life not controlled by fear, but anchored in trust. But faith, as she was beginning to learn, is not a straight path upward. It is a journey of valleys, as much as it is of victories. One morning, the sky was clear, the air calm, and everything felt right, until it wasn't. A messenger arrived from a nearby town with news that struck Mara like a sudden storm. Someone she loved deeply had fallen ill, seriously ill, the kind of illness that doesn't wait, the kind that changes everything overnight. Her breath shortened, her thoughts raced. The peace she had been building now trembled under pressure. And for the first time in a long while, fear spoke louder than faith. Not again. Why now? God, I trusted you. She didn't go to the hill that morning. She stayed inside, wrestling with emotions she thought she had overcome. Because here is a truth few talk about. Faith is not proven when life is easy after trusting God. It is proven when life becomes hard again. By evening, Mara finally stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she walked back to the hill. Each step felt heavier than before. Not because she had lost faith, but because her faith was being stretched. When she reached the top, she didn't speak immediately. She just stood there, silent, conflicted. And then, with tears in her eyes, she said something different. God, I don't understand you today. The wind moved gently. No answer came. No sign appeared. Just silence. And yet, she stayed. Minutes passed. Then slowly her voice broke again. But I still trust you. That moment, that fragile, trembling decision to trust in the middle of confusion, was deeper than any confident prayer she had ever prayed. Because faith that pleases God is not always bold. Sometimes it is barely holding on, and yet it holds. Not far from where she stood, long ago, another man had faced a moment like this. A man who had lost everything, his wealth, his family, his health. A man whose life collapsed in ways most could never imagine. And still, he said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That man was Job. His story was not about quick restoration. It was about unshaken devotion, because true faith is not built on blessings. It is built in the absence of them. Days passed. Mara traveled to see her loved one. The situation was serious. Doctors had little certainty. Time felt fragile. She prayed, not perfectly, not eloquently, but honestly. God, please heal. God, please help. God, I trust you. Each prayer carried both hope and surrender. And that is the tension of real faith. It believes for miracles, but rests in God's will. While she waited, something unexpected happened. She noticed others around her. People in pain, people afraid, people searching for something to hold on to. And slowly, without even realizing it, Mara began to speak to them. Not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had found an anchor. She shared her story. She shared her struggle. She shared her faith. And in doing so, something powerful unfolded. Her faith, once personal, became purposeful. Because faith that pleases God does not stay contained. It becomes light for others. Just like that lantern in the storm. One evening, sitting beside the bedside of the one she loved, Mara held their hand and whispered, "Even here, God is with us." Those words were not spoken from certainty of outcome, but from certainty of presence. And that is the deepest level of faith. Not trusting that God will do what you want, but trusting that God is who he says he is. Meanwhile, back in the village, Eli had grown older. His steps slower, his voice softer, but his faith stronger than ever. One morning he climbed the hill with difficulty. The journey that once felt effortless now required pauses, breaths, patience. At the top, he looked out over the land, once dry, now full of life. And he smiled. "God," he whispered, "I trust you today." Not because he needed something, not because he was waiting for change, but because trust had become his nature. And that is the final form of faith. not something you reach for, but something you live from. As time passed, Mara returned to the village. The outcome she had prayed for did not come the way she had hoped. Loss had touched her life. Grief had entered her story. And yet, faith remained. Not untouched, not unchanged, but unbroken. She walked to the hill again. The same hill, the same sky, but a different heart. Tears fell freely this time, not of confusion, but of surrender. God, I still trust you. No explanation, no condition, just trust. And in that moment, something eternal echoed louder than any answer she could have received. God was pleased. Because faith that pleases God is not defined by outcomes, but by obedience in uncertainty, by trust in silence, by surrender in pain. And here is what the world often misses. Faith does not always remove suffering, but it always redeems it. It turns pain into purpose, waiting into strength, loss into deeper connection, and slowly, quietly, faithfully, it shapes a life that reflects something greater than itself. So if you ask, what kind of faith pleases God? It is this: faith that shows up when it hurts, faith that stays when it's hard, faith that trusts when it's unclear, faith that worships even when it's broken, faith that says, I may not understand the path, but I trust the one leading me. And as the story continues, through storms, through silence, through seasons of both joy and sorrow, this truth remains unshaken. God is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for faithful hearts. He is not searching for those who never fall, but for those who never stop trusting him when they do. And somewhere, even now, on a quiet hill, in a silent prayer, in a trembling voice, faith rises again. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. And that is the faith that pleases God. The wind moves softly, carrying whispers of every prayer that had ever been spoken there, some filled with joy, others soaked in tears. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as if heaven itself was gently closing the day. Mara stood there one last time, not as the woman who had arrived broken, not as the one who had questioned everything, but as someone who had walked through storms and found something stronger than answers. She took a slow breath. Her eyes scanned the horizon, the same place where she had once stood in confusion, in pain, in waiting. And now, in peace. Tears filled her eyes. But this time they were different. Not tears of fear, not tears of doubt, but tears of surrender and quiet understanding. God, she whispered, her voice trembling yet steady. I thought faith meant you would change everything around me. She paused, her hand gently over her heart. But you changed something within me. The wind brushed past her, as if heaven itself was listening. I came here asking for answers, but you gave me trust. I came here asking for strength, but you gave me yourself. Her voice broke, but she continued. And now I understand. A tear rolled down her cheek. Faith that pleases you is not about getting what I want. It's about knowing you are enough. Silence followed, not empty silence, but full, sacred, alive. And in that moment, everything she had walked through, the waiting, the loss, the questions, the healing, it all came together like pieces of a story she could finally see. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. Behind her, footsteps approached slowly. It was Eli, older now, weaker, but smiling. He stood beside her, looking at the same endless sky. "You've learned," he said gently. Mara nodded, her eyes still fixed ahead. "Yes," she whispered. "Faith isn't about seeing the whole. It's about trusting the one who walks with you on it." Eli smiled, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Because some truths don't need words. As the sun dipped lower, the first stars began to appear. Tiny lights in a vast sky, reminding them of something simple yet eternal. Even the smallest light can shine in the darkest night. And faith, no matter how small, can carry a life through anything. Mara closed her eyes one last time and whispered, "God, I trust you, always." And in that quiet surrender, he was pleased. And if this message touched your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope today, like this, so more hearts can be reached. And subscribe to Parables of Hope, because this is more than a channel. It's a movement of light, a place where stories meet truth, and truth changes lives. Go and watch the previous videos. Let them strengthen your spirit and bring you closer to God. And always remember, Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead hearts alive. Stay blessed, stay faithful, and keep walking in grace.